So we're going to talk about 10 ways to remain patient and restrain yourself from sins. I want to begin by saying that al-ulama rahimahumullah have mentioned that keeping away from the prohibitions, avoiding sins and avoiding haram is much better than engaging in voluntary acts. Avoiding a sin is much better than a voluntary night prayer. It's much better than a voluntary fasting of Monday and Thursday. It is much better than a voluntary hajj. And why is this the case? Because keeping away from prohibitions is an obligation. Let's speak about these 10 reasons now that we have understood the seriousness of this topic. Number 1, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he said, is for the servant to know and acknowledge and realize that sins are repulsive, despicable, disgusting, and they are filthy in nature. That's the first thing. You should realize that sins are disgusting. Allah Azza wa Jal, He only forbids sins because they are disgusting and filthy and nasty. And when you are aware of this fact, this becomes a reason for why a person remains patient in avoiding sins altogether. And there is a very important principle to understand here, and that is that Allah Azza wa Jal never forbids anything upon us except that it is harmful, damaging and destructive to us. Number 2, in order to avoid sins, one must have haya'un min Allah, shyness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah says, when the servant knows that Allah is looking at him, watching over him, and he sees him and he hears him, he becomes too shy in front of Allah Azza wa Jal to commit a sin. You know, shyness in Arabic is what? What's the word? Al-haya'. Al-haya' comes from the word hay. Hay means alive. The one who has shyness in his heart is alive. The one who is not shy, his heart is dead. Having shyness of Allah will most definitely allow you to control yourself when it comes to a sin. You can only be shy of Allah if you remember Allah at the second you are committing the sin. A third way in how a person can avoid the sin is to contemplate Allah Azza wa Jal's favors upon you and His kindness upon you, and to know that sins most definitely remove blessings, and this is inevitable. So sins, they don't only take away worldly blessings. That would have been half an issue. But the problem is that sins also eat up on spiritual blessings. If you have a blessing and you would like to retain it and protect it, then keep away from the sin. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentions the fourth way in which you can avoid a sin is to fear Allah Azza wa Jal and dread His punishment. And this can only be achieved if you have knowledge of the punishment of Allah. You need to know the punishment of Allah, what Allah has prepared for the rebellious and for the sinners. The more knowledge you know about the hellfire and the punishment of Allah and the punishment of the grave, the more this way would work for you. The fifth reason is to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by far Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he said, this is the strongest way to remain patient and avoid sins and transgression altogether. This is because the person obeys the one who he loves. When you love someone, you obey him. And the stronger the love of Allah exists in your heart, the more you want to obey Him and the more you want to keep away from His prohibitions. When a person commits sins and transgression, it's because he has weak love for Allah Azza wa Jal in his heart. But the idea is, avoiding a sin out of love for Allah, there's more sweetness to it and beauty to it than avoiding a sin out of fear of Allah Azza wa Jal. Number 6, having self-respect and honor and dignity for yourself. This will cause a person to refrain from anything that will humiliate or dishonor him and make him similar to the foolish. Number 7, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah mentions to have resounding knowledge of the evil consequences of sins. When a person sins, every sin he does, it is a black dot in his heart. Black dot, until the entire heart becomes black. There are consequences to the sins. Darkness in the face, a gloomy dark heart, depression, stress, anxiety, sadness and pain, extreme unrest, lack of focus, weakness when facing the enemy, confusion in all your affairs. These are the consequences of sins. A sense of abandonment, failing to benefit from your own knowledge, forgetting to act on what you have learned and having weakness in this matter until the heart dies altogether. Quickly inshallah ta'ala, number 8, Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he said to stop having false worldly hope. Meaning stop dreaming of this worldly life and start having solid conviction and certainty that you will soon depart this worldly life. You know, the quicker you realize that we are only travelers in this worldly life, then this will help you avoid a sin. Number 9, he says, avoiding excess in eating, drinking, clothing, sleeping, and gathering with the people. He says this is because the strong temptation to sin, it comes from these overindulgements. Thus, when the permissible no longer satisfies a person, he moves to the impermissible. Take what you need of these 5 and do not overindulge. Excess of this stuff, you know what it does? I'm not telling you that this was haram, but in overindulging in what is permissible, you will find that there's no satisfaction in this. So now where are you going to go? There's no way except to go now to al-haram. Finally, this one is very short. This is the last one, the 10th. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah said, it is for the branches of Iman to firmly be rooted in the heart. He said thus, a person is patient in avoiding sins only when his Iman is strong. If Iman is weak, a person will commit sins. Iman is to fill the heart with the belief that Allah is watching. Is to fill the heart with the belief that Allah Azza wa Jal has prepared a punishment for the sinners, and He has prepared a paradise and mercy and blessings for the believers. When that Iman is strong, you will be away from sin.